Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Moving to Australia podcast. In today's episode, we are talking to our client Sumer Roy, who moved to Sydney from Calcutta. He graduated with a Master's in Professional Accounting from Federation University, Sydney in 2020. He has since worked in a few firms as an accountant and received his PR in November 2023. Today, he's here to share his story with us and talk to us a bit about his present life here in Sydney. So welcome, Sumer. How are you?
Good, thank you, Arun. How are you going?
I'm well, thank you. And a warm welcome to Amitava as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Sumer. How are you?
Good, thank you, Amitava. How are you?
I'm fine.
So, Sumer, what made you want to pursue an overseas degree?
Well, in all honesty, I actually wanted to get more hands-on experience and move beyond the textbook arena, which is very prevalent in the country where I come from, which is India. Exploring a new country and being part of a multicultural environment, that's always been two goals of mine. Additionally, an overseas degree offers exposure to different teaching methods, diverse perspectives, and the opportunity to build a global network. So these factors combined make the experience invaluable, both personally and professionally. That's probably one of the reasons why I wanted to make the move in the first place.
So what persuaded you to study in Australia and nowhere else?
I did a bit of research for quite a few countries. Australia being closest to home, that was number one factor. And Australia is always, they have a pretty welcoming attitude towards immigrants, and it's got a pretty high standard of living, and there's a plethora of opportunities available that were major deciding factors that basically made me come here. And of course, the country's commitment to education and its support for international students are exceptional. Also, the vibrant multicultural society in Australia ensures a rich cultural experience.
So you're from Calcutta, you have a bachelor's in commerce. Now, when you moved to Sydney, you initially enrolled into an MBA program, but after you consulted with Amitava, you decided to switch your program. So talk to us a bit about what's that like? What challenges did you come up against when you had to make that switch?
So I come from a family of with a background in sales and marketing. So naturally, I initially pursued an MBA. Very early on, I figured out through Amitava, the next step to basically securing your future here would be to get into a more secure line, which would be accounting, accounting being one of the professions. And of course, given my bachelor's that I've done in BCom, so that made the switch pretty easy. And it was a pretty logical choice. So basically the MBA over here in Australia and New Zealand, so for the APAC area in general, unless it's from a very high-end business school, it's a very generic degree. So accounting basically is a specialization. It was a very easy choice at the end of the day. And Amitava made that very clear at the very beginning.
Yeah, there's another reason as well, right? Because MBA, if someone studies MBA, there is no pathway to PR. So I guess, the other reason to switch was it opened at least a pathway to PR, right?
Yes, definitely. I'd say MBA, if someone would want to do an MBA, that's probably at a later stage if they want to go up the management charts. But to actually secure your future here, to basically
get a PR.
It's essential if you get into...
MBA is a value addition.
Correct, 100%.
To what you do. MBA is not necessarily on its own qualification. That's how I see it. And especially those who come from Indian subcontinent, for them, MBA is quite a big thing. So in India, a lot of people do MBA. That's because there is a competition, and if someone has MBA, they have an edge over others in employment. But I think in all the education agencies in India, and I think if they are listening, they will be upset, they probably do not have that openly discussed with the clients when they enroll, that MBA may not be a good idea if they want, if the student want an option to go for PR after they complete their education.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that.
Did you know that MBA was going to not help you with PR? Or maybe you did not think of PR. That's a different issue.
I did not delve deep. Thing is, the agents in India, generally, they give you sparse information. They don't go into the depth. They just basically say that there's an opportunity for you to go abroad, and then the rest you figure out by yourself.
So I think if all those who are listening, it is important to do some research on what you are studying, so that at least you know once you finish your studies, if you really want to have a PR, you need to carefully choose the occupation or the course that you study, so that it is an occupation which is on the list for you to migrate.
100%.
So when you did decide to make the switch in your program, did you have any challenges at the university? Were they okay for you to move from one program, the MBA program, to the other?
Not really. During when I made the switch, I was in the same university itself. So essentially, it was just transferring my first semester credits onto new course. Back in 2019, it was comparatively much easier because a lot of students were coming in and starting let's say an MBA, and then figuring out that, as Amitava said, it's not going to lead to a PR. So just make the switch to a course that will essentially help you getting the PR. Accounting being one, IT being the other, so on and so forth. So I'd say currently, as of 2024, if it's not related to your occupation, the switch can get hard, right? And it needs to be approved by the Department of Home Affairs.
What's the current challenges for a student, Amitava? Can you elaborate on that?
So basically, if someone is doing an MBA and then switching to MPA, it's easy because a lot of those units are common. If the subjects are common, in India we say subjects, here they say units. So if the units are common, then you can carry the units and move on to another course. But if you are switching to something like, say, chef, cooking from MBA, or if you are studying accounting and decide to be a nurse, then there will be question marks raised. There is now a new criteria known as genuine student criteria. If you are switching to a totally irrelevant course which is not relevant to your background, then the intention is clear. You are not a genuine student. You probably are doing this so that you can extend your stay and probably eventually get a PR.
So is that more like genuine temporary entrant, like a GTE?
GT was the earlier criteria. Now GT is gone. It's called GS, Genuine Student Criteria.
So Amitava told me that within a month of you moving here, you met with an accident.
Yeah, that's
right. What happened?
Yeah, well, at that time, like every other student, I was doing a few odd jobs, then decided to try my hand on Uber Eats. So yeah, unfortunately, on my very first day, I had the accident. Ended up breaking my front 2 teeth. Didn't know anyone at the time. Called the paramedics. They took me to one of the hospitals in the city. Received 5 stitches, but yeah, I was very upset for my teeth because lost them. So ended up going to a dentist, and it was abnormal charges.
You were on a motorbike? You were in a car?
I was on a bicycle. So yeah, it was. It just happened all of a sudden. To be honest, I had a random pedestrian come in front of me, tried to not hit him, so I ended up falling myself. Anyway, that was pretty bad. And then ended up going to a dentist soon after, the next day.
Did you have any medical coverage to cover the costs for the visit to the dentist?
I mean, not the dentist. I didn't have dental coverage, but I did have the overseas student health coverage. It's called the OSHC. So that covers pretty much everything except dental. Everyone who's listening to this, the dental coverage comes at an extra cost. It is there, but it can get expensive. And by expensive, I mean you need to dish out a couple of $1,000s. So eventually I got my teeth fixed, but I had to book a flight to Calcutta and I got it fixed from there. Because it's 1/6 the price in Calcutta than Sydney. It's it can be super expensive.
So there was a break in your program when you had to move back to India?
No, it was during my semester break, so good timing.
So after you graduated with your master's, how did you support yourself until you landed your first job?
Look, I'd say when one makes the move to a new country, you have to support yourself financially. So that essentially means picking up odd jobs, which a lot of us have done. I've done it myself. So I happen to work in retail, in convenience stores, in restaurants, and warehouses. I was fortunate to get a part-time sales role at Telstra, which allowed me to build and foster a lot of new connections and relationships. These connections helped me secure my next two roles eventually. So I'd say building relationships is crucial, as it's often about who you know rather than what you know. Juggling university and work was quite challenging, but definitely taught me time management and the importance of perseverance.
What time of the day were you working?
Well, no 2 days are the same. I'd say some of the days I had classes on Tuesday and sometimes on Friday. And the rest of the days, my workplace was very flexible, which was good. So sometimes I came in on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and then alternate the next week. So yeah, it was juggling two of them were not that easy.
What's the limit on how many hours you can work as a student?
I'm pretty sure it's the same as it was before. It's 20 hours a week. So that's basically 40 hours a fortnight.
So how did you meet Amitava?
Amitava is a very close family friend. We go back eons. Amitava's first cousin and my mother were, if I'm not mistaken, schoolmates.
Yeah, so I knew your mother, but I didn't know you.
Yeah.
Until you came to Sydney.
That's right. I met you in 2019.
Yes, that's correct.
So when did you start working on your 189 visa, and how long did you have to wait until you were invited to apply for the visa?
Well, I started out on a student visa, which is subclass 500 when I initially moved. And then once I finished my graduation, my master's, I moved on to a 485 visa, which is basically a temporary resident visa. So that was in the year 2020. And then, so basically 2020 to 2022. And then I applied for the 189 visa through Amitava. That was in August 2021. So Amitava was basically my biggest supporter, helping me make my dream of living in Sydney a reality. His professional dedication and personal touch have been invaluable. So yeah, I got the invite in December 2022 during one of the largest immigration rounds in Australian history, I would say. I was granted PR in November 2023, so that's 11 months after receiving the invite.
So Amitava, what happens when his temporary graduate visa expires and he's still waiting for an invitation for the 189? Can you explain that to our listeners?
I think you got your visa or invitation while you were on TR, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So he got it while he was on TR. If the TR expires and someone has not got an invitation, they need to find other options. Like the other day, we were discussing about Sagnik, who we got on a training visa after the TR ran out. Or, some kind of sponsorship. Some other visa has to be explored while waiting for invitation.
So before his subclass 485 expired, he got the invitation to apply for 189. So once he puts in the application for 189, he moves over to a bridging visa?
Yes. That's right.
And the bridging visa is granted but not activated until the 485 runs out.
So bridging visa, as the name suggests, is basically a bridge between two valid visas. So my valid visa was 485, which is the temporary resident visa, and the permanent resident visa is 189. So that bridging visa basically bridges the gap between these two visas.
And first you get a bridging visa A, and on that bridging visa A, no flights land, so you cannot leave the country.
That's right.
So you have to jump to another bridge known as bridging visa B if you have to leave the country and come back. So if someone has a bridging visa A and they leave, they cannot come back. So this point is very important. Apply for a bridging visa B before you leave for overseas.
And you helped me with that. So thank
Did
you.
I? Okay.
Yeah, I did go to India last year, August. Applied for a bridging visa V.
So you have worked as an accountant in quite a few firms after graduating. Is it easy to persuade hiring managers to make an employment offer when they realize you are not a permanent resident in Australia?
That's a really, really good question, Arun. I'd say convincing hiring managers can get quite challenging, but there are some companies that offer immigration support as well. But for that, as I mentioned before, building connections is key. It is essential. Well, I'll talk about myself for a little bit. So after I secured my job at Telstra, that was a full-time role. I got it through LinkedIn. Over time, I built relationships with at least 400 to 500 different companies. And they were key stakeholders in the business, for example, higher up in the chain, like directors or CFOs or whoever. I think the first step is always the hardest, but it gets easier with time. Out of these 400 or 500 connections that I built, so 2 of them helped me get my next 2 roles. So the next company that I joined was Future Ed, where I was an accountant. I still know the director, we're still in touch. I was basically doing what I studied for, like basically just working as an accountant.
What would you say would be your go-to job portal as a young graduate who's seeking employment in Australia? Is it LinkedIn, Indeed, Seek, or something else?
Look, these are the most common job portals. If there is a grad program available, I'd say go for that. It's called the graduate program. So a lot of companies offer that. During my time, I could not do it because of COVID. That was 2020. I mean, I could have done it later on, but then I was already working full-time by then, so I did not explore that option. But that's a really, really good and secure way to start your career. Let's say companies like KPMG or EY or Deloitte or any one of those big 4, or maybe a lot of other IT companies. So these companies have this graduate program where you start off as a junior, let's say analyst or accountant or whatever it is, and then you move around in different teams for, let's say, a good 6-month period to a year or so, and then you're made permanent. So that's a comparatively easier way to land your first role, as opposed to applying to hundreds of jobs on LinkedIn, Seek, where you're practically ghosted by the recruiter. And I've seen a lot of these advertisements, like basically it's looking for an entry-level role, but then with 3 years of work experience.
So if you went to the career section of these big companies, you would find graduate program roles available?
Yes. So you need to register before time. So that would be before June or July. So registration for 2024-25 has closed already. So if you want to register now, it will be for 25, 26.
Because the financial year here starts in July.
That's correct.
Yeah. Now, what would be your advice to international students who want to study here and get some work experience in Australia?
Well, before I answer that question, I'd say have a clear end goal in mind. So basically, you want to decide if you want to enjoy the first couple of years and then return home, or if you aim to stay long term and contribute to the Australian economy. So you will have 2 different lifestyles for that. So I mean, your approach to life is going to be different. So for example, if someone wants to come here and study and live here long term, they need to be focused on getting the necessary points that are required to get that PR. So if I were to break it down, some of the basics would be if you're not from USA, UK, South Africa, Canada, and I think Australia, New Zealand, they're basically these 6 Commonwealth countries, you need to sit for an English exam. So it can either be the PTE or the IELTS. So you need to get your scores, like you need to get high scores in all of these sections. So that's listening, reading, speaking, and writing. That's one test. Then there can be a test called the NATI, which is it's a community credential language. So multiple languages, and then that contributes to I think 5 points. And then of course there's There's your work experience, there's your age, and there's a lot of different factors. So you need to be on top of things to actually make sure that your assessment is not expiring, your points are not expiring. And yeah, I mean, Amitava he's an absolute genius. He's very professional, and he just makes sure that you stay on top of everything. And he's been wonderful.
You remember how many people you have helped since you started this business?
Well, now I think it'll be more than 6,000.
From all over the world, almost.
Yeah. And I've cooked for many of them. Remember I cooked for you, Sumer?
You remember when I cooked for you?
Yes, of course.
And our final question before we wrap up this podcast. Tell us a bit about what you do now and what, in your opinion, is special about Sydney that draws people from all over the world.
Sydney is a very multicultural city, and it's got a very fast-paced lifestyle, and it's got a plethora of opportunities. Basically, it's got the Sydney's harbour, the beaches, and the vibrant city life. They attract people globally. We've got the Vivid, which is a festival of lights, kind of. Yeah, and then, of course, there's a lot of different events in Sydney, beautiful locations, and yeah, you can go for hikes, and it's a wonderful place to be. It can get challenging, but it's also highly rewarding for those willing to adapt and thrive. So that's one thing. To answer another question of yours, what I'm currently doing. So I recently completed a contract with my last company called Altogether Group. I was a financial accountant, and I was working on an OCR project, basically integrating Microsoft Dynamics 365 with our internal systems. Currently, I'm pursuing CPA to get certified to basically enhance and bolster my career prospects.
Thank you, Sumer, for your time. As always, Amitava, thank you for your time and your company in the studio.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot for your time. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you, Amitava.
Thanks for listening, folks, and see you next week. Bye.